Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the sequel to the surprising 2014 Marvel film Guardians of the Galaxy, and it was something that really caught everyone off guard. After seeing that Thor: The Dark World post-credit scene, people were like, I don't know how this weirdness is going to work in a movie, but they pulled it off with flying colors. And in this movie, the Guardians are pretty much working for hire for anyone willing to pay them, and after they do a job for this gold society called the Sovereign, one of the members ticks them off, and now the gold people are chasing them, wanting to kill them, and while they're being chased, they crash land on this planet where they meet a man named Ego, played by Kurt Russell, who is claiming to be the dad of Peter Quill, who he left on Earth many years ago with his dying mom. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was a huge surprise for many people, not just because of how much money it actually made for being an unknown comic book series, but just because of how awesome and funny the overall movie was and how you could actually get behind these characters you pretty much had never heard of or never thought they would actually work in a movie before, yet James Gunn did it perfectly. So when they announced that a Volume 2 was being made, I was super excited for it, and I was also getting really pumped up with the marketing they were putting out, but I was really more excited because of James Gunn coming back to write and direct, and him pretty much saying that he didn't want to retread anything that happened in the first movie. He wanted these characters to grow, and that honestly made me super excited. This movie quickly became my most anticipated film of 2017, besides Star Wars, or Dunkirk, or Baby Driver. So going into this movie, I was super excited. I was hoping that James Gunn had done it again with this movie, and walking out, I gotta admit, I was slightly disappointed in it. Now, I think there are some reviewers out there, I won't say them by name because you probably know who they are, who are being kind of harsh on this movie, and honestly, I don't necessarily agree with those reviewers saying that it's one of the worst things the MCU has put out, or it's the worst thing, because have you seen Iron Fist? At least with Guardians 2, the characters are likable and fun, and in Iron Fist, Danny Rand is a bland, boring guy. And this movie overall is just too entertaining to just be thrown away as the worst MCU film. There's a lot good in this film, and I'm going to talk about the good first before I get into the disappointing, because this is a good film. But in my opinion, it just missed the mark on some things that it should have hit the mark on. But first, let's talk about the main aspect of this movie, the character growth. And it really is kind of surprising because in most action sequels, especially comic book movies, they try to up the action more, make it more exciting. But in this movie, when I was watching the action scenes, they didn't feel like they were trying to outdo anything that had happened in the first movie. It kind of felt a little scaled down as far as like sequels go, and I was honestly really surprised by that. But the character growth is honestly so good in this movie that I didn't mind, because James Gunn really did deliver on what he said earlier about wanting to grow these characters. For the most part, he did that, and the majority of it really does come from Peter Quill interacting with his dad, long lost to the stars, and it was really satisfying to me seeing them build up more on the Star-Lord character from the first movie, because they did have a lot of drama regarding Star-Lord from the first movie, and seeing them really build on it in the second movie, especially after that one specific scene near the end, was honestly really well done, especially one pivotal moment near the end of the second act that just, wow, that was so good. Especially Pratt acting-wise in that specific shot. You know which one I'm talking about if you've seen it. That was great. I will admit, though, that Kurt Russell as Ego, though he is a good actor and he's not bad in this movie, the character could have been written better. The first half of his screen time is pretty exposition-heavy and pretty much just explaining stuff. It's a little boring, but then later on he gets a little bit more interesting and I got on board with him. But still, that doesn't take away with how good Chris Pratt is playing the Star-Lord character, proving that he's not just a goofy guy carrying around the Walkman and his earbuds all the time. He is actually an interesting character with layers. Another pair of characters that they do this with are Yondu and Rocket. They really do show off some similarities in this movie between the two of them, and they do spend a lot of time together in this movie, so seeing them bounce off each other was also really fun to watch. And Michael Rooker was so good as Yondu in this movie, especially when he's going over some of the things that have happened to Yondu in the past. It was so much better than the Yondu we saw in the first Guardians. Not that he was bad at all, it's just he was just kind of there and he was funny, but then in the second movie they actually gave him more time to shine as his own character, and it worked so much better. And even Rocket Raccoon, one of my favorite scenes in the first movie, besides him cracking so much jokes and making stuff being really awesome, he had a scene in a bar where he got drunk and he really showed off his vulnerable side, and I was hoping that they did another scene kind of like it in this movie, and I was not disappointed with that. Especially since his big pal Groot is now a baby, and he doesn't have that same interaction anymore, and he's pretty much trying to mentor Groot in a way, even though Groot now has the mind of a baby. And speaking of baby Groot, if you are going into this movie expecting lots of cute moments from baby Groot, you will not be disappointed. The intro of this movie, it involves baby Groot. One of the best intros you're going to get for a movie for the whole year. I'm just going to be honest about that. That was hysterical. And there's also a really funny Prison Break scene that I will not spoil at all because that scene was honestly genius. Baby Groot shined in that scene. It was so funny. And I'm so glad that James Gunn didn't just have Groot be the same as he was from the first movie for the sequel. I'm glad that they kept him, like, going through, like, the growing stages, pretty much. Another thing they built on from the first movie was the Nebula and Gamora relationship. And after the first movie, I really did want to see where else they could take this relationship, since they're both the daughters of Thanos, and I gotta imagine that that's pretty rough. And in this movie, they pretty much do explain how rough that is, and I will just say one thing, without spoiling it. Nebula, there was always something that I assumed about her from the first movie, and in this one they pretty much clear that up, saying, no, Jackson, you should not have assumed that, here's what actually happened. I was just like, oh, that's pretty messed up. And it just makes me really excited for when Thanos will actually show up and be the main villain in Infinity War, because the Guardians are going to be in it. I'm so excited and interested to see where that's going to pay off, especially after hearing a certain conversation that happens in this movie revolving around Thanos. There are two Guardians characters that don't really have the same dramatic heft as the others besides Baby Groot, and that is the returning Guardians member Drax and newbie Mantis. Both of these characters don't really have much dramatic going on, but they are really funny, and Drax, in my opinion, he stole the show. A lot of people are going to say it's Rocket, or that it was Yondu or Baby Groot, but for me, Drax stole this movie. Whenever he said a comedic line, it honestly had me dying. He is hysterical. And I know there's some people going to be disappointed because he had a lot of dramatic heft going on in the first movie because Ronan killed his family, and in this movie they do make him just more jokey. Pretty much his whole performance is jokey. And honestly, I'm fine by that, because when Thanos does show up in Infinity War and Drax does show up, that's where a lot of, I think, the drama is going to come when a fight happens between both of them. So seeing Drax just spit out all of these funny, hysterical lines and just let loose for a bit was just so funny. It was so hysterical to watch. And seeing him interact with Mantis, it's kind of like a father-daughter bond that's kind of messed up, especially with some of the jokes told between them. I won't spoil it because it's special. The jokes in this movie are special. They should be savored. So even though that relationship is kind of messed up in a sense, it is also pretty sweet. And as I mentioned earlier, the action scenes are really fun to watch in this movie. The visual spectacle of this thing is honestly just huge eye candy everywhere you look. You cannot see one frame of this movie and not be visually interested with what's going on. Whether it's the makeup on someone's face or on their whole body, or the sets that they're on, or the CGI background that they have. This movie is visually gorgeous, and I heard that they switched out cameras for this movie. As far as like other Marvel movies, they use one camera and they switched it out, starting with this movie. It really does show the cinematography and how it captures all these colors and gorgeous stuff. It is so cool, and what's one of the main reasons why I really love the first Guardians movie is because this universe is so fascinating, and seeing more of it in Guardians 2 is satisfying to me. I do need to get in some of the things that disappointed me, though. I did mention Kurt Russell earlier, but there's another thing that has been a consistent problem with these Marvel movies that you'd think wouldn't be a problem anymore, but they still are. And it's this antagonist group. The Gold People, led by Elizabeth Debicki playing Ayesha. Not interesting. Really bland, honestly. They pretty much just get mad because one of the Guardians ticks them off, and they just chase them around. And it's honestly, they're so pointless. When I was watching this movie and all of a sudden the Gold People just showed up and shooting at them, I was just like, oh no, they don't need to be here. And I know there's the argument, the post-credit scene, but that's the post-credit scene that's hinting towards another movie. and it has pretty much nothing to do with this movie. And I guess I should say the 5 post-credit scenes they have, it is pretty funny. I like how they spaced it out so you're not like dreading watching every name. You'll have like every post-credit scene come up like every 2 minutes, so that was much better paced than the other Marvel post-credit scenes. And also, if you keep your eye open, you'll catch some things in the post-credit scenes that are pretty cool. But really, guys, what made this movie really disappointing for me, the guy who was really anticipating this movie as it could be one of the best things of 2017, but the big problem I had with this movie that honestly for me really killed this thing for what it could have been is that this movie is tonally confused. In one scene you'll have the Guardians telling a bunch of jokes, but then all of a sudden there'll be this screaming match between 2 characters that's really dramatic and heavy, and then we'll have this funny prison break scene, and then this really dramatic reveal will happen that's really just oh my god. And then all of a sudden we'll have this visual gag that's really funny. This movie honestly does switch from dramatic to funny too much, and it's not flowing well at all. It's not like the first Guardians movie was overly ridiculous and silly the whole time. There are some moments where they cut back on the jokes and just had a serious conversation real quick, but those moments actually felt built up to, like they toned down the jokes a little bit, and then all of a sudden we cue into this one specific scene that was led into. In this movie, there's just one scene going on and the tone switches constantly. Or the scene ending as being dramatic, but then we start up the next scene being really zany and funny. It honestly just felt really disjointed, and it constantly took me out of the movie because I didn't know how James Gunn wanted me to feel. If he wanted me to be emotionally invested in the characters and their dramatic stuff going on, or if he wanted me to take none of this seriously and just laugh at all the jokes going on. You can't have both without balancing them well. And there's another comic book movie that came out, Logan, that is pretty much overly depressing and serious and dark, but there are some moments of levity in it. But whenever they cut to those jokes, it doesn't feel like it's interrupting the pacing of the depressing tone they have going on. It felt like this joke needed to be here. We needed to have this. It felt built up to. It felt like it flowed naturally. And then in Guardians 2, it just felt like they didn't have that same balance of tone. And there's a scene near the end that I felt like I should be crying at this, but it's a combination of the dialogue is way too on the nose here. You could have kept the scene silent, and I think I would have been emotionally on board with it. And it's also because you had 2 really funny jokes going on before this one specific moment happened, so now I can't get emotionally invested into it because you just had me laughing like 2 seconds ago. And honestly, the flaws with this movie as far as ego and the gold people and the tone could have been fixed with just one more rewrite. Like, okay, we need to fix the writing for the ego character, make him a little more interesting when going over this exposition stuff. We gotta fix the gold people, make them more menacing, and we need to balance this tone. All of that could have been solved with just one more rewrite. But because of the tonally disjointed feel of this movie, I was constantly taken out of it. And yes, I did laugh at the jokes. They are funny. James Gunn is a funny dude. But when you have to shift from this really funny scene to drama, it's like, this doesn't fit. But still, I did have fun with this movie. The characters are fun. I like that James Gunn took the time to develop these characters, and the action is fun. The movie is visually gorgeous to watch. See it in 3D or IMAX, whatever has the biggest screen, because you will be enjoying every frame that you will be absorbing with your eye holes. It's just that tonally, this movie did not know which one to be on. They didn't know how to have both and balance it out well, and I think that could have been fixed with just one more draft. Overall, I'm going to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 a B. It is really fun to watch. If you just want to see some fun scenes going on, if you want to be taken in with the beautiful visuals, and if you really are interested to see where these characters go, you will like this movie. It is without a doubt a good movie, not a bad one at all, honestly. It's just that there are some opportunities that they really did miss, and one more draft of the screenplay could have fixed that. But if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, leave in the comments below of what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.